Okay, so hello everyone again. Welcome to our third and last workshop of this series, where we try to engage data users and share tools to analyze and use structured beneficial ownership data. In our last workshop, we focused on the open ownership register and the bots notebook, and today we're focused on telling stories. While in the past we focused on specific tools to generate and analyze bulk data, we want to share now some examples, use cases, and interesting visualizations that might inspire your work by using both national and international data. So by the end of today, we expect that you get inspired and have clear ideas for investigating and using BO data that can integrate the information and tools shared throughout the three workshops. So, you know me, I'm Agustina. I'm joined by Stephen, which has been sharing lots of his knowledge and work in the past few workshops. So the agenda for us today starts with a very short feedback from the homeworks that some of you submitted from our last workshop. And then we will share some background on the scale of the issue and why it's important, present use cases divided by policy areas and angles of analysis for BO together with other policy areas. And then we'll have an open discussion with all of you. We want this to be a reflection webinar where we not only share some tools, and there's a small task at the end, but also to give the opportunity for you to ask any further questions or to share reflections and ideas you might have, as it's our last convening together, to give the opportunity and timing for exchanging and making questions, both from this one or from the past workshops and tools that you might have. And then we will just close and share some next steps at the end. So to begin with the feedback on the homework, as I said before, our last workshop was focused on the open ownership register and the bots notebook. And so we wanted to provide a very short detail. So I won't go into all of the people that submitted their homeworks, but some of the examples that clarify the case. So one of the tasks was to find a company which has more than 10 beneficial owners. And some of you, actually 2 people submitted this company. And let me go to the page of the register where this company is listed. It's listed in the Slovakia register. And so if we go here, if we view it as a graph, we will see that it can't be listed because it has too many owners to display. But if we go to the list of people, we will see that there are some people like Andrea that holds interest as from 2020. We have Boris, we have Peter, but then we have others that have ended their relationship past ago. So we have Anna, we have Stella, we have Milan. So when we see, when we look for the relationship between the beneficial owners, we need to see whether the relationship is still active or not. And so actually this company has just 5 beneficial owners that are active on them. So we have Andrea, we have Boris, we have Peters, we have Andrej, and then going down, we see many of them have already ended their relationship. And so that's important to bear in mind when we look at this. So it's not because the importance of the register is that stocks past information so that we can have track of ownership throughout time and how the ownership structures change through time, which is very important for investigation and analysis. But then for looking at the current picture, it needs to be bearing in mind that. Then when we go to the next, to the second part of this first task, which was to find a company that has at least one unknown beneficial owner. Some of you submitted Total SA, which we didn't know whether it was the French company or the Australian company, but for the case of the explanation, both are useful. and another person submitted these cross-lane investment partners. So if we look at the French and Australian Total SA companies, we see that they have unknown persons, which is good. But then why is the beneficial owner not named? And here the response wasn't clear enough or wasn't completely accurate. So I want to open the floor to see if either the person that submitted this homework or any other want to jump in and share with us why we can't see the beneficial owner of the French Total SA company. And sorry, if you can't unmute, please raise your hand or write up in the chat and we can allow you to unmute. Anyone that wants to give it a shot? Don't be shy. Okay, I will give the answer just for this time. And it's in the French case, it's mainly because the beneficial ownership register that Open Ownership holds doesn't have information from the French register. So the Total Energies UK Finance Limited company is registered in the UK. And as we collect data from the UK, we know that the legal owner is Total SA, which is a French-based company. But then we don't know the beneficial owner because we don't have the information from the French register, which hopefully we will in a few months' time in the register, but we don't yet know it. So it's not because they haven't disclosed it in particular, but because we don't have that information publicly available yet in the register. So that's why the importance of public registers and linkable data in different jurisdictions. So we are able to track ownership throughout different countries and jurisdictions. And the same happens with the Australian one, because we don't have data from the Australian register in the global register that Open Ownership holds. But there's another thing to consider in the graphic from the middle. Is there anything that comes to your mind when looking at the register, when we're looking at this company? We have a shy audience this time. I can't open the chat, so Steve, if there's someone.
Fatima said, is it because the company is grayed out? Is it because Abu Dhabi is grayed out?
Yeah, exactly. That means that the company has been dissolved. Whenever there is either a gray company or a gray arrow, that means that either the company does not longer exist, or because the relationship has ended. So here we see that the arrows are in blue, which means that the relationship is active. But if we see these in gray, we see that the relationship had ended. And so the same happens when a company. So again, when looking at this, needs to be bearing in mind if you just look at the graph option in the register. And then finally, the last one was okay. Yeah, I mean, they submitted these companies as having unknown beneficial owners, which actually it has two beneficial owners, but probably there was this mistake because both companies, the cross-lane companies, both of them are not longer active in the UK. So maybe that was one of the mistakes. And another person submitting the British American Tobacco company as having an unknown beneficial owner. The person didn't submit that it was the PLC, but we assume it was the PLC one because all the others that have British American Tobacco in their company name, they do have other connections. So we assume it's the PLC. And so when we go, let me get to the register, when we when we go here, we see that, and I want to put this just for you to see all the connections. They weren't available in the, you see, like we have lots of connections between company with limited companies, with registered mainly in the UK, and then here all of them are subsidiaries of the British American PLC Tobago. Can anyone tell me why we don't have the beneficial owners of the PLC company? Anyone? We do have data from the UK, so it's not the same reason as for the total SA ones.
No answers in the chat.
No answers. Okay. This is mainly because under beneficial ownership regimes, public listed companies are exempt to submit their beneficial ownership information in the local jurisdictions if they have already submitted that in the stock exchange where they trade and they operate. So in this case, British American Tobacco is listed under the London Stock Exchange. So if we go to their page here, we can see lots of information about this company, about their operations and shareholders, and lots of information. So this is kind of a challenge that investigators and data users have, because you won't find all the beneficial owners of PLCs when you're looking into a national listed company, and you have to go and look it in the stock exchange where they operate and trade. Yes, Andres, please jump in. You might have lots of intel about this.
No, actually, I had a question about the other case. I guess I cannot share my video. The case where you have the unknown of Total, like in France. So in this case, it is a UK company. And why is it that it is the unknown? Just because it didn't declare anyone?
I think, Steve, you are the holder of the register and might know that. I think because last time you explained about the legislation of the UK and not being obliged to disclose another level or something.
Let me just double check on that specific case.
Okay.
I think it's because I think it's simply because of the reason that Aga said, which is that basically we don't have the French register in the open ownership register, so we can only follow the chain as far as we can go. And so when you go to that one, we can't. The French data is publicly available. We just haven't done the work yet to bring.
No, I know, but like from the perspective of the UK company, I mean, if it is a UK company, it should have, regardless of what's in the ownership chain, they should have declared their beneficial owner. So I was wondering if it's simply they couldn't find anyone because no one passes thresholds, or if they simply are not complying and are not reporting anything.
It looks like the UK company is just reporting the French company. I need to go to the source.
Yeah, I think we might just not know whether it's because of the threshold or because they just lacked the disclosure of a physical person. Yeah, we don't know the reason.
Might actually be the listed might be a listed company. I mean, if it's Total, the oil major company. Because I was wondering, in case there is really a company that simply hasn't complied and you detect that just because you have it as an unknown person, do you have any way to be reporting this to the UK authorities, being like, hey, these are all the companies that have not submitted anything? Because I mean, I feel like you're way more advanced than what Companies House is doing, so at least be sharing some of these with them.
We're doing things at the moment that we've been sharing with them. So Agus mentioned this earlier, but we developed some notebooks that would show things like the number of companies that haven't submitted within the last year, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to share a lot of that with them. At the moment, they're not doing that kind of investigation because, you know, they don't have those powers and they're asking for the powers. But yeah, it's kind of ongoing conversation with them about that. Definitely we can see from our data, there's a lot of examples where people's birth dates are missing, addresses are missing, nationalities are missing. Someone's put their birth date as the year 9,998. There's lots of people who are listing birthdays in 2022 because they're getting the date fields mixed up. There's lots of issues that we hopefully will work with them on and help improve the data. But at the moment, they're not using some of these tools, I don't think. I guess back to you.
Yes. Okay. I was just wondering if that. But yeah, definitely more to do. I mean, that's why both the notebook and the work that we do, and if others also investigate, and we can start reporting. And I think the UK has kind of a field where you can report incorrect or missing information. So by spotting individual cases, that can also be the case. Okay. So moving to the other part of the working with the both notebook, and we submitted using the Latvia's register of enterprises in particular. We shared about how to look up for information in the individual statements, and then briefly how to do SQL queries to mix two different statements, let's say a person statement with their name and a birth date statement. So by combining them through an SQL query, you can have a list of the people that are the oldest or the youngest. So one of the questions is, who is the oldest PO listed on Latvia's register? And I think just one person got this one correct. And so let me just open the website. And so here is how the query should look like, which is using kind of the birth date, the country, and the full name, and combining person statement with address and their birth date as well, ordered by the Latvia country, and then just listed from the from the oldest date to the most updated one. And so here we can see that this person was born in February of 1917, which is the person that has been listed as the oldest one. We don't know whether this person is alive or not, but it gives us kind of idea. And here we can see others. I mean, all the people that have been listed. Here we have the same person 3 times, which goes back to the thing that we discussed the first workshop about having unique identifiers and avoiding duplication in how people are addressed and integrated. So, well, here we can see all the people that are listed. And so the same for the oldest. If we go to so that was the oldest. And if we go to the youngest, the query looks similar, but then we just order it from a descendant perspective. And here we see that there's descendant perspective. And so we see that the youngest people is this one, which is what was born in October of 2017, probably being a family member of an oldest person that has been listed as being beneficial owner of that person's company or operation. So again, this is just a hint to continue investigating whether this is just a mistake in the submission and whether this person is part of a broader family member in interest or information. And again, you can just play out and using the SQL not template guidance and tutorials to play out and linking different statements and information from the notebook, both from the Latvia or from the general open ownership register. Steve, do you want to clarify or add anything before we jump into the actual content of this workshop?
No, just to say that once you know how to do one of these queries as well, there's lots and lots of guides, as Aga said, for free about writing SQL queries like this. For example, if you went and changed the URL now to have Denmark in it rather than Latvia, you could run exactly the same thing to see who is the youngest person who, well, you'd have to change the bit where it says country Latvia, but you could look for the youngest Latvian in the Denmark registry very quickly. So it's easy to kind of compare between countries and to run this same thing for all the different countries that we have in the register. And so at the moment, that's the UK, Denmark, Slovakia, and soon we're hoping to add to the Nigerian data and places like France and other countries that we're looking at. So yeah, just really keen to see anyone use these tools and to answer any questions if anyone wants to know more about it.
Okay, does anyone have any question, reflection, or like challenge that you faced while trying to do any of these tasks that you want to share before we jump into the next section?
Andrew, as I said, it would be great to have a workshop on SQL queries.
Yeah, you said that last time as well. We couldn't make it for this one because we had already planned this, but we are, you will see that in the post workshops series, we have prepared kind of an evaluation form. And one of the questions is about what further workshops or webinars you would like to take part on. And that one is one of the options to select. So we need to prepare that because we are not the experts. So we want to secure someone that actually is proficient on the topic. And then we'll for sure make something more detailed on the notebook and SQL in the near future. Okay, so Steve, over to you. Do you want to share your screen directly?
Yeah, I can do. Okay, let me just do this. I was just going to share very quickly for I think we mentioned it last time, but there's an example I just shared in the chat that gives you and shows you kind of the hundreds of queries that you could write about beneficial ownership data. And that's something that we're going to be doing more on and unveiling some more tools on for our, on the Open Ownership website quite soon. So hopefully that will be of interest. Hi, everyone. For people who, hopefully everyone was here before, but if you weren't, my name's Stephen. I'm the head of technology for Open Ownership. I'm here presenting with Agus today. And what we've done in these workshops so far is the first one kind of explains some concepts around beneficial ownership. The second one looked at examples of tools that we've got that people might be able to use for stories. And this third one, what we want to do is to look at beneficial ownership in the news, how people tell stories, how beneficial ownership data helps to inform a whole range of stories, not just about the data and information itself, but also helps to build on other information and expand stories. And we're going to share a few resources with you that you might want to look at and to look up if for your country you want to find some documents, do some work, do some digging, try to find out who is behind particular companies. We do realize, because we're doing this project through opening extractives, and this was only open to countries that are members of opening extractives, the whole project that we're doing is working with lots of those countries on releasing more data. So we know that in a lot of countries, there's not the most amount of data available so at the moment. So what we've tried to do is find some global sources or some really useful examples that we can share with you today. So what I want to do is just talk about kind of some of the scale of the issues that people often try to look at and use beneficial ownership data to get a grip on. And then we'll go through splitting up some of the kind of sectors and the kinds of types of stories that we tend to see people doing. We're going to go back and forth between me and Agus, because we've got a whole lot of examples from all over the world about how people have used data. So we'll look at a story example or an investigation and explain either what tools they use or what sources they used. And we will share all the links with all of those. So I've just shared the link to the presentation in the chat. So if you want to go there all the things we're talking about, all of these stories you can see in front of you are all kind of linked to from the speaker notes, or if you click on the pictures themselves. So it's worth saying that the whole point of doing this work and the whole point of doing this project and these workshops is because we hope you're interested in how there needs to be more transparency about beneficial ownership all over the world. And here are just some examples of stories that have come out in the last month or so that relate to issues that have arisen because people didn't have enough information about who's behind companies. So whether it's the fact that 1,400 sanctioned Russian individuals or people linked to companies are still doing business with the EU because people weren't able to track back who owned all the companies. Whether it's the OCCRP story in the middle talking about the number of people people in Syria who are receiving money from the UN because of the company structures that they're using to hide where the money really goes back to. And I'm based in Zimbabwe, so I put in another one about Zimbabwe and the fact that here there's a huge issue of no one really knowing who owns a lot of the mining companies and lots of connections with government there. So these are just some examples of stories where behind the scenes, they're all made worse by the fact that there's no information, or it's very difficult to find out who's behind companies. And that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of, and that's what lots of beneficial ownership stories focus on. Now, what people are doing about it is, happy to say some of these examples are linked to open ownership, but lots of countries all over the world are trying to push for more and more transparency about this. More countries are releasing data, more countries are creating registers. Sadly, not quite enough of them are all public yet and releasing data that you can use in the way that we've been trying to show you here. But there's more and more happening in that area. So we do hope that in the next year or two, there'll be a bunch more countries that start releasing their data and making it easier for people to kind of connect what's going on and who owns those companies back to the individuals behind them. So there's examples here from the FATF standards that have been changed so that all countries in the world have to do better on how usable their data is and how public that information can be, unless they are using it a lot inside the government themselves, whether it be Kenya that's going to publish details about procurement contracts or people who are winning procurement contracts, and other examples like even places like Sweden have promised, Switzerland have promised that they're going to do more in this area. Sorry, there's stuff in chat, but I'm hoping Agus can have a look. I can't quite get the chat to open up.
Yeah,
so,
it's me sharing links.
Okay, so okay, great, sorry. But for now, still there's a huge issue about how there's not enough information about beneficial ownership. And when we look at stories and when we've pulled together some examples of the kind of stories you might want to tell, the kind of stories that you might be interested in looking into more, the following sections and the following areas sprung out at us. So there's lots of investigations about how beneficial ownership data affects procurement and public procurement. Who are the companies, or who are the people behind companies winning bids, who won COVID related contracts, lots of which were done under kind of emergency legislation because they were done so quickly. So there's a whole big issue there about how you find out who's behind some of these companies. Often there's politically exposed people, so politicians, their families, that are all involved in these deals as well. So that's another area that we're going to give you some examples of. Sanctions. So the war in Russia, or Russia's invasion of Ukraine, has thrown up very complicated examples where people have suddenly had to try to get a grip on exactly who they are connected to in all of their deals through the kind of beneficial ownership and following the beneficial ownership chains of all those companies, because based on the kind of US sanctions, the EU sanctions, you are not allowed to do business with companies that have these kind of substantial connections to Russia. And if that is obscured, people might still be carrying on, as we saw earlier with that EU research. So that's a really important area. Like, how do you find out who's sanctioned, and how do you find out if those people have connections with a company that you're wanting to look into? Obviously, classic, Andres, who just made a comment here earlier, is from the Tax Justice Network. They've done a huge amount of research, and there's lots and lots of evidence and research about corruption and the kind of connections and the opaque structures that are used by people and corrupt individuals to hide money, to take money, and to move it to tax havens or other places. So that's another area. And national security. So if you aren't aware of who you're doing business with, how do you know that the money you're giving out is not going back to a state that you don't want to work with, going back to individuals who actually pose a security threat to your country? On a couple of these, if you look in the notes and the stories we're just about to share, there are briefings, kind of detailed briefings from the open ownership team about these. So on procurement, especially, and on national security. And we're just about to publish a new briefing about corruption or anti-corruption measures and how beneficial ownership data can be used for that. So that will be published in time for International Anti-Corruption Day, which is on the 9th of December. So that should be coming out very soon from us. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of those sections, give you some examples of stories, and hopefully kind of spark some ideas or some things that you might want to look into further in your countries. Tell you a little bit about how some of these teams did those stories. In a lot of cases, we're not connected to it. We haven't been doing the work, but we are very interested in seeing how people are using ownership data and what they're trying to do with it to try and help solve some of those problems if we can, or to reach out to people. So these aren't all examples related to open ownership. What we want to do now is show you what people are doing in the world, whether they're investigative journalists or civil society organizations, and hopefully some of those will prove useful. And then, and all the links to find the information are all in the speaker notes. So I think I'm up first. And like I said, me and Agus will bounce back and forward on this. True Intel. True Intel is an example from a company actually that we did work with in the UK called Blue Anvil. They have done a piece of work where they took beneficial ownership data, connected it with screening data, so looking for sanctioned individuals, and also connected up to public sector data and procurement data. So what they had created with True Intel was a kind of experimental project where you could look up any company or any individual, and you can see all the tabs along in here. You could see all of the companies that they were linked to in terms of their ownership, other related companies where connections could be seen from the open corporates data. And you're also able to go into the public sector data. So you're able to find the contracts that they'd won, and then in terms of their filings, see the information if they were on a kind of public exchange or there were other bits of company information that were published in the UK. Now, all of this was made possible by the fact that they used our data standard, they used the open contracting data standard, and pulled all that information together. So it's a great example, we thought, to share of if all of this information is public, then it becomes a lot easier to try and have this kind of view where someone just wants to look up a company and find out really who they're doing business with. And you can see in here, you can look for parent companies, companies in the group, and the ultimate beneficial owners in the group as well. So this was a fantastic project. We really hope that actually they're going to open source some of the work they've done on this so that other countries could reuse it if they wanted to. We've written up a blog post about it that's underneath in case people want to find out more. Agus, shall I pass over to you on this one?
Yes. So this is a Mexican non-government project built by a local CSO that it's named Poder. And this means who is who, quién es quién. And what they did is collected information from different data sources and pull it all together in a central website and database, which is open source that anyone can consult, and explores connections between businessmen or women, politicians, companies, and public institutions, and contracts that the national government of Mexico and some subnationals one have procured and contracted. And so this is just like the database that comes together. It's when we prepared these, the website was currently down, but we believe it was more about some licensing, and it's not because they are not maintaining the project, but just like a mistake in the URL, and will be solved soon. But then this database has been used for many projects and investigation, being the one that, if we go to the next slide, they looked into the contracts of the building the Mexico City new airport. And so they scrapped and put together in the database all the contracts that the Mexico City government had procured and hired people for on companies for building this. They found that 70% of the contracts were adjudicated with no public tenders, and most part of the budget was contained in 15 contracts. And when they started looking into the contracts, Mexico doesn't have a bio register, but they found that many of the companies had subsidiaries of other companies and being listed internationally. And then when they started looking in international sources, in stock exchanges, in the London one, in the US one, and they looked into the UK PSC register and found that just 5 people owned 50% of the contract. So if we see in the graphic and looking at it not only from the content of the of the investigation, but also looking the graph analysis and how they build it, we can see all the contracts that are listed in the middle. And then if we go to the right-hand side, we see how they get smaller and smaller when we start looking at who we started like with a big number, then we see that the main budget is containing 15 contracts and then just 5 people that are just pulling the strings of how an airport is constructed. So this kind of both the background of the analysis, but then the way to visualize it in this network analysis and try to make it very graphically is also super interesting. This is another public procurement example that comes from Ghana, it's an investigation conducted by Manasseh Asure. He is a Ghanaian well-known researcher, and he went undercover and this is a 40-minute documentary. So it's not visualization, but just like inputting key interviews, undercover operations, and visualizations in a video. And he reviewed Ghanaian business register and the public contracts and found that the CEO of the Public Procurement Authority was illegally selling government contracts for other people and company. And they also found that the company that was intermediary in that operation was his cousin and wife were part of that company. And so, of course, this person, it's very interesting to watch the documentary and how he's pulling the investigation and making questions, because it starts quite broad. And this person, which is the CEO of the PPA, he denies everything and knowing the company and knowing the people and any wrongdoing. And then as Manasseh starts showing evidence and all the things he had already gathered, this person started admitting many of the things. So it's not only interesting from the perspective of the analysis and the content, but also the methodology of the investigation and how he conducts the interview. And this documentary was taken by the local CSO, the Ghana TI chapter, and they made they sued this person in the judiciary of Ghana, and then this person had, of course, resigned, and he was not in prison, but he had a fine of I don't know how many salaries, and he was also obliged to give back to the Ghana state much of the money that he had taken off through these illegal set of contracts. So it's also interesting to see how investigators and CSOs come together and one builds on each other's work and investigations to hold people to account and to make it pay for their wrongdoing. Back to you, Steve.
Yeah, I think I'm next. So the next story we've got is the data team who are behind the story we mentioned earlier. So the idea that there were lots of Russian-owned businesses that were still being awarded tenders in the EU. So to explain how they did that, DATLab are actually a team that are based in the Czech Republic, I think, I'm pretty sure. And what they do is they regularly pull in procurement data from all over the EU, and they use that and try to republish that in ways that other people can use, but they kind of do it in line with the Open Contracting Partnership standards. And what they did is they took all of the information from the EU about who was winning tenders, and they went off to the Orbis system that's mentioned here, that is a paid for beneficial ownership solution. So that's offered by Bureau van Dijk to check who the beneficial owners are. And then try to combine it with open sanctions data. So we'll talk about open sanctions a bit later, but it's an open database pulling in all of the world sanctions data so that you can go to one place and you can try and see the names and the lists of all the people who are sanctioned from all over the world, all pulled together, so you can see for one person all of the countries that have sanctioned them. And then pulled that together and did the work that you can see here. So trying to work out the number of tenders that were awarded, and actually you can see from that graph that it didn't really change very much during the start of the Ukraine war. So if all of these Russian-controlled or sanctioned entities were still getting lots of tenders, maybe that's a bigger question about what the EU needs to do and how it might need to take greater steps if they really want to kind of enforce some of the sanctions that are going on there. So not some of the data that was used here is open data, but not all of it. The Orbis system is not all available openly, but it can be, people can pay for access to that. So just to remind you, basically the stories that we've seen in this section on procurement, behind the scenes of a lot of those, there are a bunch of data sources, and we have linked to all of these from the bottom of the presentation. So for people who are just joining, maybe we need to share the presentation again towards the end, but we'll share it out to everyone in the end. But you can see there's Open Contracting Partnership data. So there's a link below which has all of the countries that have open contracting data available. If you want to go and try and find that for your country. DATLab offers information for the EU in case that would be of interest to you. There's technical partners called Spend Network that we've done work with, who also offer procurement data and do lots of analysis on top of that and allow people to pay for access to their data. And because this is an open extractors project, it's also worth mentioning that in terms of contracts and in terms of procurement deals, lots of natural resource and fossil fuel companies are obliged to publish the contracts that they get, whether they get them from government or get them from other kind of public sources. So there's a site called resourcecontracts.org, which is run by the Natural Resource Governance Institute, so NRGI, that you can go to and you can find and search very easily for contracts to look them up again by country. And our team at Open Ownership are really closely partnered on this Open Extractors project with EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. So it's worth saying that all of the countries that EITI members published lots and lots of information and data about all the companies, the oil, the gas companies and everything that are in that country, and what contracts they're winning, how much money they're getting from government, how much money the government is spending. And so that information is either available on the EITI website or it's available if you go to their data site. You can also download a bunch of the information and reuse some of that for countries, because I know all of the people who are here are due to be from countries that are members of Open Extractives. So yeah, so there should be information for your country. Moving on, the next kind of area of work that we wanted to look at to talk about how some people have addressed it using beneficial ownership data is beneficial ownership and PEPs. So this is politically exposed people. That is usually kind of politicians, but then also public officials, and in some cases there's legislation where that also means their family, their partners, their children, etc. So we just want to point out a few examples of what people have done with this data. Now, the most famous example that kind of pulls together all of the threads really we're talking about here are the ICIJ leaks that have been happening for more than a decade now. So this is the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, who I know we've mentioned before, but we just wanted to make it really clear in this session, in case people missed it before, that from the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, the Pandora Papers, all of those investigations have been run by the same organization, and they actually publish an open database called the Offshore Leaks Database behind the scenes, so that you can go and search through a kind of a minimal, it's not all the full data they've got hold of, but they have got information on 800,000 offshore companies. And so it's fascinating to go and see that. And obviously this contains a lot of world leaders or former world leaders, politicians, people who are very well connected. So you see a lot of stories where people go and look up things like this. Even the EU story that we just talked about before, this was one of the sources that was used to say, you're like, oh, these 1,400 people, we should really know that they are connected to these contracts because we looked them up in the Offshore Leaks database, or we looked them up on the sanctions database. So that it's a great resource to go and look at, and there's all sorts of information about how to use it. ICIJ have also released a series of videos about how to make best use of the database, and that's all linked to in from our presentation. But yeah, a great resource to go and look at. I guess, should I pass over to you for this one?
Yes, sure. So the Anti-Corruption Center of Ukraine, which is a very well-known organization there, together with an investigative journalism network named VIHUS, built this website, which is called pep.org.ua, where they gathered information from the beneficial ownership register from Ukraine, which was the first of its kind public open data, together with politically exposed persons and their assets declarations. And so they linked together whether the person had different connections. And so here, this is a very graphic example in which we see the center, which is the former president of the country, that has lots of connections with both legal entities and public figures. So we see in the icons, those that have like a briefcase are companies, and where we see like two people or one people, we can see the connections to them. And so if we, well, at the right, there is kind of the legend of each of the icons. And so if you click on each of them, you will be able to see what the connection specifically is. And this is just kind of raising red flags and seeing where there are connections that might imply not wrongdoing, but then when there is either a failure in disclosing some potential conflict of interest or failure of disclosing a link between a person and the company or the connection with another person, then that implies further investigation. And actually these platform has been used for further investigation by another investigative journalism, where they looked into another MP, a member of parliament assets declaration, and they found that he was gaining annual earnings of $60,000 or something like that. And when they went to see where were those earnings coming from, they saw it was from a kind of a waste pit that had no apparent value. All of these are documented in our Ukraine impact story that we can share the link afterwards as well. But so here, the main thing that we wanted to share is about how connecting people with their politically exposed situation and assets declaration can help you address potential conflicts of interest. And the next one, it's another red flag platform that was built by Directorio Legislativo, which is a Latin American organization. This is a Colombian project, and we are in the process of supporting the development of a similar platform in Nigeria. And here they combine PEP's data with assets declarations with government contracts and extractive licenses. And so they identified both the government officials that had red flags or that had connections with potential government contracts and licenses to identify red flags. So all the small red dots are red flags. And so here it is very interesting, as Steve was saying before, about the EATI reports, where we can see all of the companies and ideally the companies' beneficial owners that hold mining licenses or extractive licenses from oil and gas as well. And so by combining that with the assets declarations and with other government contracts to see whether the same person has interests in different sectors, or as we saw with the Mexican example, there are just a few people concentrating many of the licenses. There are some countries that hold, that impose a maximum number of licenses that they can have. Like for instance, now in Zambia, they are trying to limit it to 5 mining rights that one person can have. So by knowing the beneficial owner of the companies that hold the licenses, we can see if one person is holding lots of licenses in different regions and is like concentrating all the market in an area. But in this case, we're combining both licenses with contracts and with politically exposed people to see the red flags. One of the challenges they had when building this platform, because they identified like 19,000 red flags. One of the challenges was that the PEPS database, which was like around 20,000 people, it both combined like members of cabinet, MPs and judicial officials, but then it also combined kind of public employed doctors or public employed teachers, or those people that hold public posts. So when looking at kind of public employment databases and that, there or even PEP's information and databases needs to be seen actually who these position and job titles are, to kind of try to really assess where a potential conflicts of interest can be, where there is like significant influence of that person over the operations in that. And so hopefully we'll have by mid next year a similar platform in Nigeria.
Great. I think I'm next. So yeah, the next example we've got is actually from Malaysia. This is called Politicus, and it's run by a team called the Sinha Project in Malaysia. And what they've done, which is very interesting for us, is they've created a kind of political database of people who have previously been ministers or MPs and who have appeared in Parliament and in different records, and then try to connect that with companies that they own or that they have beneficial ownership interests in, as well as linking them to show their family relationships and things like that. So it's actually a database that right now there are general elections happening in Malaysia, and they've been doing lots of work to make sure this information is up to date. So that if people want to look up these politicians, they have a kind of history going back. This example you can see here is an MP who was the MP from 2013 to 2018, but they still have the kind of the information there, so you can see these networks over time, what they're doing. And interestingly for us, this uses our data standard, the Open Contracting Data Standard, and also the one on people, which is called the Popolo standard that My Society in the UK first created. But it's how do you, around election time especially, create a database of all of these people who are politically exposed now or have been in the past and still have connections to individuals. So it's a really interesting kind of platform to kind of look around. Again, all of this code for that is openly available, so it could be reused in other places. Just a few things to finish off. So this is the PEP section. So I just spotted someone was just joining us. So there are a few databases out there where you can find PEP's data. Peppercat is a project that is spun out of a project on Wikidata, but is largely like trying to create lists of all of the world leaders and all of the politicians from every country everywhere in the world. So it's really interesting to go and look at their work, and it's very difficult to keep that up to date, but they try. Open Sanctions provides lots of information again on PEPs, especially if you want to look for the connections between politically exposed people and perhaps sanctioned people. That would be really good to look at. And RUPEP is the example that was mentioned earlier, which is had a kind of renewed focus because of the Ukraine conflict, but basically lists Russian and Belarusian PEPs and offers all the information so people can reuse it to help follow through with all the sanctions that have been put in place over the last year or so. sanctions. Speaking of sanctions, we're going to go on to a few examples about the kind of stories that people sometimes tell, and increasingly you can see more and more of these in the news, because the number of sanctions being enforced over the last few months, especially on Russians, has kind of shot up. It exponentially changed since the start of 2022. And so it's become quite a data challenge to keep up with who is sanctioned and who isn't. And it's even more of a challenge to then connect those people to the companies they do own or don't own or have beneficial ownership relationships with. I'm sure people here, if you're interested in the areas that we're talking about and around beneficial ownership, you will have seen investigations that show, you know, X oligarch owns this company, or someone has found out that they have handed over the control of a company to their wife or to their son or something like that, and try to hide the fact that they are actually the owner behind some of these companies. And obviously that has huge ramifications, because people aren't supposed to be doing business with people who are sanctioned. So that's what some of these stories try to hint at. I think we mentioned this before, and we're still in the process of trying to finish this project. But there's a piece of work that's been done called Open Screening, which combines our data with all of the databases that are listed there to try and have a single view of, here's all these sanctioned people in the world, and here's all the beneficial ownership data and data on who owns companies, and how can you combine all of that so that you can look up an individual and see, are they sanctioned? Are they politically exposed? Are they a beneficial owner? And then you can build these kind of quite complicated chains of who everyone's connected to. We're really hoping to get this launched in time for International Anti-Corruption Day, so I'm doing my best to get that launched. But in the meantime, there's some links down below that allow you to go and look for some of this data. Already you can see the links between ICIJ's database and Open Sanctions on the Open Screening website. Hopefully that will be updated really soon. But for us, another example of why having more information public and being able to connect more of it really realizes the value of beneficial ownership data, because you can spot connections you wouldn't be able to before with all of these separate registers. So another project to talk about is the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or OCCRP. Do fantastic work in this area, and have been really following and chasing down lots of the connections that some of the oligarchs and very rich people from Russia have with companies that are still carrying on work all across the world and across Europe. So they launched a project called the Russian Asset Tracker, where they did an interesting kind of, they had combined the data that had already been leaked to them, documents that they already had in their database, and on top of that, they kind of added this information where they created pages for all of the people who were sanctioned, and tried to show how they were linked to all these companies. So it built on a lot of their work in the past, but it's moving faster and faster and faster. And so if you go to that website, you not only see the kind of reporting they've done, but that they were very open to asking for tips and for asking for people to come to them and leak information to them and say, you know, how do we identify who really owns that yacht? How do we identify who owns that house? And to try and kind of reinforce the point that they've basically been making for years through their reporting, that there are these huge webs of opaque ownership that are not very well understood or known, that have come to the fore and have become a lot more important in the last few months, since the conflict's been going on. But so yeah, all of their reporting and all of the pages for people are all on the Russian Asset Tracker website. A very interesting example that came up in the last week, so I wanted to highlight for people, is this project. So again, this is all part of the Opening Extractives project, where Open Ownership are working with EITI on getting more beneficial ownership data on who really owns extractive companies published into the world, and especially at this time when some of those extractive industries are going through a huge amount of change, both because of the kind of energy transition towards more renewable energy, but also because of changes around climate change, change around sanctions and everything. This project came up last week. It was launched at the COP climate conference. And it's a really interesting example for people who really want to look at how difficult this is. So what they've done here is they have used satellite data to find 80,000 locations all over the world. You can see that some of them are quite concentrated in particular parts of the world, which emit the most amount of CO2 and other gases, and they're trying to detect this from satellites, from space. Then for each of those, they have images of the locations. They try to calculate how many emissions come from that location, but they also try to work out who owns that factory, that mine, that location that you're looking at. So once you peer into this data, if you download some of it, you'll find that actually, even with this kind of huge project that this team have been doing for the last couple of years, they've only managed to locate the ownership details for about 4,000 out of the, there's 80,000 locations here. So they've got details on about 4,000 locations, I think, and they have all of their the methodology and everything published. But if you're interested in this, and if you particularly wanted to look at the connections between what might be happening in your country and who owns those companies, then you can click on any of the dots when you go to their map, and then you can also download all the data. All the data is available openly to reuse, and they've also published their methodologies. And there's one that just explains how incredibly difficult it was for them to find out who the companies are behind who really owned all of the locations and the factories and everything. They're looking at state-owned enterprises. They're looking at public listed companies and everything. It's quite an interesting project, and I think they are trying over the next year to improve that ownership data so they can show much more like who are the companies behind a lot of this activity. So it's a very interesting example, and lots of the data that they release is all published on their website. So just repeat again. So the sources that we talked about there, Open Sanctions is a great source of database where you can just go and search for people's names, or you can download all of the data on any politically exposed person by country, by name, by any other kind of filter you want to apply to it. Climate Trace example, great example about extractive companies and why it's quite difficult to kind of connect some of this activity back to really who owns them. And the Aleph platform is the platform that was built by OCCRP. And so if you go to there's a huge amount of leaked documents and information and data from company databases and everything that they've collected over the last 5-6 years, which provides some really good examples. And again, all searchable. So basically Aleph is a tool that allows you to upload PDFs and then to search for names and companies and everything that appear in documents. So they try to link all that data together. And it's a great resource to go and to look at. So next we're coming on to, I'm just trying to check on the time. Yeah, doing okay. Beneficial ownership and corruption stories. I'll go a bit faster so we've got a bit more time to talk at the end. Just some examples that we wanted to focus on. There was this one published recently, which was a huge kind of investigation told through
Sorry, Steve,
lots of finding information on oh, did my connection just go there for a second?
Yes, I don't know if it was me or if you broke a bit, but now you're okay. If you can repeat the beginning.
Sorry, is it okay now? Yeah, I just got warned that my connection was on.
No, you're still breaking a bit.
Hopefully. Agus, do you want to take it? We can just, okay.
Are you back? Yeah, you look like your connection is off.
Okay, is it working now? Okay.
It is much better, yes.
Okay, apologies for that, everyone. So I was just saying, so this story is a kind of example of someone trying to piece together, because there isn't really data available, trying to basically Google and find a huge amount of information online that links a particular individual back to lots of companies that are involved in kind of dodgy advertising practices. So it's a good example to look at because it shows how much work this person went into into finding out who owns some of the companies that were all connected back to one particular individual. So yeah, a great investigative journalism example there. This was a case, so Open Ownership recently have written about the European Union and how we would like to see more connections and more public data coming from European beneficial ownership registers. And this is an example of why that would be important. So it's a team of Belgian investigative journalists who have tried to look at what connections there are between Belgium and Malta. And so Malta and Cyprus appear in lots of investigative journalism stories about Russian money or other kind of slightly dodgy connections. And to link back to what we were saying before about this, all the stories are published, but it was also based on information that actually came from a beneficial ownership register that does exist, but is not public. So the Maltese register is there, and not many people can use it unless you go and pay. So we wanted to point to this as an example of why more data and more information being public would help to make these connections across different countries. And this is an example, again, where the documents were used and done via Aleph, which is the platform we talked about earlier. A recent example that came up from the UK showed how, this is from Transparency International UK, and what they did was they used a variety of sources, but some leaked data, but also looking at things like the UK Companies House database, which allows you to search for company filings and to search for beneficial ownership data. And they also actually used our, for a tiny amount of this project, use our open ownership register to try and find some of the companies that own the shell companies that were identified here. So this was an example where over a couple of years, they managed to show how millions and millions of dollars were moved out of Russia because people were using fake procurement documents to pay a huge amount for kind of plastic bottle recycling projects and things like that. So things that wouldn't raise suspicions, but the amount of money being talked about was completely out of sync with what those things should cost. So recommend all of these. A lot of these have come from really great organizations who do a lot of work in this space, and just really wanted to show some of the things that they do and how they kind of look at it. So again, just to repeat some of those. So the Aleph platform, you can go openly search through that by country or to try and find documents there. In some countries, there'll be asset declarations or lobbying registers that could be really useful for you to use in this space. The ICIJ Offshore Leaks database is a great place to start if you want to go and look for particular individuals you think might have connections outside of your country or to other companies. And if you want to find what places, so if you did have some money to buy some of this data, because like I said, sadly, a lot of these registers aren't yet open, you can go to our open ownership map, and then it will, if they're available, we'll provide a link to the register, and then you can go there and see what the rules are. In some cases, they'll allow you to search for it for free or get the data for free. In other cases, you might have to pay if you wanted to look up something in particular. And I think this is, am I right? This is the last section of stories for us to look at. So just before we go into this, it's worth saying that Open Ownership has a whole briefing about beneficial ownership, transparency, and national security. So all of the ways, my colleague Timon wrote this briefing about all of the ways that more transparency about beneficial ownership overlapped with national security concerns. And we've got one example that's taken from that briefing that actually we want to just explain to you today. This image is taken from the Open Ownership website, from the briefing that's linked to below. And it's a kind of interesting example that pulls together lots of stuff we've been talking about. So lack of public information, extractive companies, tax havens, kind of people who are beneficial owners who are registered in countries that don't publish their data. This one's got it all. So what happened here was that, again, the Iranian regime was sanctioned by the US in 2018. And as a result of that, they had to divest themselves or to change the ownership structures that they were using for some of the companies that were linked back to Iran's national oil company. So it's worth saying that Iran's national oil company is huge. They're up there, you know, there's Saudi Arabia, Iran, and other Middle Eastern states that have huge interest in oil and gas. And this is one of those examples. So obviously a lot of money at stake here. What you can see in front of you is not the information that got published, but if you go into the links below, you can see what is published about all of this this setup on the Open Ownership website, on the Open Ownership Register website. So the link to that is below. I don't know, I guess if you can get hold of the link so people can compare and contrast. But basically, the information you can see here has become released because of the trusts that are involved. Now, internationally, beneficial ownership of companies is more transparent than the beneficial ownership of trusts. So there is a very worrying kind of trend where you'll see trusts being involved in lots of complicated structures, and there are moves to get more visibility and transparency about trusts. But just to say right now, basically trusts are less transparent about their beneficial ownership than companies generally worldwide. And in this case, you can see that there's the Bluebell Purpose Trust, I believe is listed in Jersey. Got that flag right, yeah. And so what you have with trusts is you have people who can be the beneficiaries, the trustees, and the settlers of that trust. But because Jersey do not openly publish all their information, it would be very difficult to find this information. I think this was actually taken out of company filings and accounts that had to be published. So, you know, buried in a PDF that had to be published somewhere rather than being openly available. And you can see that it's incredibly important to know that this person, Nigel Hall, is the beneficial owner of a trust that also is connected to Iran, to the national government of Iran, and how that connects to the company that's registered in the UK. So this is a classic example of information where some of this information is publicly available because it's from the UK. Some of it is not publicly available because it's from places like Jersey or other jurisdictions that don't yet have public registers. They're all supposed to have a register by the end of 2023. So we hope that there will be more public information that can be used for things like this in future. But it's an example that is dug into in our national security briefing to show why it's more transparency about these kind of matters is really important, because otherwise it would have been almost impossible to find out whether Iran was complying with the sanctions that had been put in place on it, or whether they were just hiding what they were doing and still kind of using this structure. So the full details are all in that briefing for people who want to find out a bit more, but it's just a kind of good example of why some of these elements keep coming back. And here are some examples of places where you can go and you can find kind of databases that do exist about the threats that countries face from terrorism, from the national security threats that countries face. And in a lot of cases, there might be reports from the local FIUs or the financial investigation units that look into the state of those problems and how widespread they are, and how many cases there are where beneficial ownership information would be very useful, because when they can say there's shell companies or opaque structures that are involved in those cases. So that is it from me for now. So we wanted to, like I said, to share all those stories and to say to people that we hope that some of those might kind of spark off some ideas, let you know about databases that exist out there. So obviously we at Open Ownership are going to continue to do our best to get more and more beneficial ownership data published. But the databases and the resources that we just wanted to talk about will hopefully be of interest to people, so that you can see how there's other sources that can be connected up. Once you know a bit more about who owns a company, you can go and see if any of those people are sanctioned, if any of those people are politically exposed, if any of those people have appeared in some of these other databases where they should be flagged. But now, me and Agus would be really happy to answer any questions. I guess that's the
yes.
now. Yeah. So please, if you have any, you can either raise your hand or you can put a comment in the chat and we can make it so that you can, oops, sorry, let me stop sharing. What is the link for publicly available UK public? Okay, I can share that.
Yeah, I would like to open the floor to see if anyone has any reflections or questions about any of the examples. I know it might have been a bit overwhelming, all the information and different examples. We originally thought of focusing this one on the kind of the bots visualizer, but then we covered it on the first workshop. So if there are any questions about how that one works as well for building your own ownership structures, then that's also useful. And yeah, you can see the presentation there if you want to go back to any of the links or the examples. But please, yes, Danielle.
Hi, I would like to thank you for the great examples that you've shown here. I would like to share another one with you. It's on the chat now. The thing is that we have in 2018 in Mexico something called the master fraud, where almost $400 million were appropriated by particulars, especially by the government. And now, and initially this Synapses initiative was created by journalists, and now it's more like a regional thing. And I think it's very interesting because if you go to the link, there's a way that you can use a tool with and it displays a map as well, but also a kind of graph where you can see all the people and the companies and the government officials where are, like under investigation, and there's lots of information about all of them. All the information is public. Unfortunately, it's just in Spanish, but now it has grown and it has collaborations from many people from many Latin American countries like Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Peru, Panama, Venezuela, and everything is done with official information. I mean, with open information from the government. And I think it would be very interesting, to link these kind of tools with what you do, because so far this project, it's able to, you can upload your own data, so you can cross information from different databases, but it could be very useful if you could just create something with them, because it would be much more beneficial for everyone. Here, the tool, it's really underused. It's mainly used by journalists, but it will be much richer if something it can be with bots. Thank you. I just wanted to share that other example with you.
Thanks, Daniel. It's very interesting, and I'm looking at the website now. Can you please, if you said this, repeat, because I might have missed it. Where do you take data from? I mean, you mentioned public information, but is it where do you specifically, which data sources?
Yes, it mainly comes from government data. We have a National Institute of Open Data. So civil society has been struggling over the years to open most of the information from the governments, and all the information you can find there, it's public. And you can also download information from this tool as well.
Thank you for sharing.
Okay.
There's a couple of people whose names I recognize from Ilda, and I know there's some people
exactly,
there. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. And it's worth saying as well that unfortunately for us, Mexico is a member of our beneficial ownership leadership group, and they are probably the member who are doing the least. So I really hope that they can be convinced to do more and to release more data. But they are one of the countries that we bring together. And just to say, they're almost the only country in that group that don't have their data available in line with our data standard in some way. Norway's register is coming out in January 2023, and so they are the other member. So once some of their information is public, Mexico is really lagging behind. So I hope they can be convinced to do more on that. But thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Are there any projects that you're aware of or questions you might have, something you want to share with the group?
One thing to add, well, maybe I didn't fully talk about earlier on, is that obviously this, like I said, this project, Opening Extractives, is a partnership between EITI and Open Ownership. That's because if a country is a member of EITI, they have signed up to an agreement saying that they will have a public register of the beneficial ownership details of extractive companies in that country. And lots of countries are developing these and launching these now. So if your country doesn't have one right now, you should know that the EITI requirements have said that it needs to be released within the next year or so. I'm trying to remember the exact deadline, but it was changes that came in kind of 2020, 2021. And so now the kind of checks and the validation of all of those countries' memberships that's happening, we'll be looking to see if there is public information. So it's worth tuning in your country if you're interested in extractives in particular, because there might be a register that hopefully will be launched soon.
Any questions, reflections? We want to keep it interactive. I know there are some people here that have conducted investigations or that have worked with PEP's data as well. So if you want to jump in and share your own experience or what challenges you had when building your story, how to frame and communicate things, what tools do you use?
Thank you, Fatima. So Fatima's made a comment saying she's looking forward to using the Open Ownership Register in Nigeria. We're getting there, Fatima. So but for anyone here who's from Nigeria, Nigeria is another team who's a member of the Beneficial Ownership Leadership Group, and actually they've been working with us for about 2 years now, and they've been rebuilding their register. And I can tell you that they do have data that's published in line with our data standard. And now we're at the stage of trying to work out how we can extract and offer all of that data for people to use. So yeah, really excited that all things being well, touch wood, next year we'll have that data available in ways that people can use and look at.
Okay, if there are no further questions or comments, we can go back to the last bit of the workshop. Do you want me to share, Steve, or do you want to do it? Okay. Okay, so we won't get into any of these now to actually build something, but we did wanted to share with you some tools for visualizations, because it's very interesting not only to have the ownership structure built, but then also to make your story appealing, to share whatever the content you want to share, or make your case. So We have worked, we showed some of the, some websites that have networks that connects people with companies, with other people, with political parties, with entities, contracts, etc. So Kumu is a very useful, user-friendly, easy to use tool, open and free. And of course you have a pay kind of subscriber option, but you can also use it for free, and it's very easy to play out with. So you can just enter, create an account, and start playing out with. You can, I think you can upload a CSV with information or directly create it manually. And so if you're building a small story or like with a few connections that you want to make it more appealing and integrate that, that's a very useful tool. And then, as we said, not only about bio diagrams or connections, but the general design to make your stories nicer, to include, let's say, how ownership changed over time, for instance, or ownership and voting rights, or different types of ownership or control that might a company have, and want to show it graphically. So you can build using Canva or Pictochart. They both have templates or lots of nicely infographics and slides that you can create to also make your story more appealing. Or directly for building bio diagrams, we explored in the first workshop how the bots data visualizer works, which you need to upload JSON data. So if you have your own JSON data, you can upload it there. Or if not, you can create your own bots data by using the spreadsheet generator that we explained on our first workshop, and then pass it over to JSON on the data review tool, and then visualize it on that one. And I think, Steve, you added the others if you want to jump in sharing on those.
Sorry, I can't. Where's the option to turn my video on? It's not, sorry, it's not showing the option to turn my video back on. So apologies about that. But yeah, so the ones at the bottom are a collection of tools. The top one is the visualizer you can use if you have some of our data, and you can put it in there, and it shows you what the beneficial ownership looks like, what a diagram for the data you put in. Cytoscape is actually another great example. It's the one we use currently on the Open Ownership Register. We'll be moving over from the second one to the first one soon, but it's a great example. And then Curious and Neo4j are the tools that are used by people like ICIJ, and they're the kind of the hardcore ones that if you have a huge data set and you want to make sense of it, we can really recommend those as a place to go and to pull in all of the data and to try and understand it. Yeah, again, sorry that I just can't see how to turn my video back on. Apologies about that.
Yes, I can't make you as well. I don't know what happened. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, just wanted to give you like 5 minutes to think of a potential story that you would like to build. And this is very important for us to see what resonates with you, what type of tools and stories you want to build, what data sources you're interested in, and how we can support in that process. So just like take 5 minutes, 3 minutes, what type of story you would like to build, whether you have data sources or what information you would like to gather and where you'll take it from, either using the global ones that we share today, like both the register or Aleph or ICIJ or many of the ones that we share today, or your own national information, whether you have access to bio registries or to asset declaration, political financing, AT reports and that. And then how you would communicate it. Will you use visualization tools or techniques? Will you make it more like a video and documentary, graph analysis? So whether any of the tools that we explored would be useful, both for data accessibility or for communications. whether it's on procurement, anti-corruption, national security, PEPs, sanctions, etc. And then whether you would need any support from Open Ownership AT or the Open Extractives program. So very straightforward, just to come up with a couple of ideas on what types of things you would like to use or do, and how we can be of assistance and support. So we'll give it just 4 minutes until 38 past, something like that, and then resume back with the end of the workshop. Okay, is there anyone that wants to jump in? Even if you don't have the answers to all of the questions, just to share some ideas or what you're working on currently that might relate to this. Anyone? Yes. Purity, please. I'm asking to unmute, but then I'm clicking too many times and I'm mute you again. Sorry.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I joined late. First of all, my apologies. But one of the stories that came to mind when I saw this opportunity for these workshops was one that I have tried to research unsuccessfully, and we're trying to see the connection between people who own oil fields in like northeastern Kenya, like in Turkana, a lot of oil fields, and along that, all signed are located to various companies, which when you dig, they lead you to Mauritius and other complicated jurisdictions. And I gave up. So I thought when you give that exercise, that's what I thought about. Of course, I have like more actual projects that I'm working on, but right now my big challenge is like following assets. So I don't know whether such a database was shown before I joined, like being able to see like in terms of corruption money, where does it get stored, especially because in Kenya we don't have a lot of these data sets publicly available, like land ownership, property ownership, just the properties just coming up, and there isn't like much data to connect. But yeah, that the people who have been allocated to various oil fields is an interest for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Purity. And actually, Purity works at Finance Uncovered, and one of the Kenya examples that Steve was mentioning at the very beginning is one of the stories that she worked on. I mean,
So Purity,
great...
I'm not sure when you joined. There was one thing that we mentioned early on. Oops. I can't click in. Sorry, the chat's not opening up for me. I was just checking the climate trace map that we mentioned earlier on. I'll try to, so I'll hand over to Agus and I'll try and share the link for you to check.
Okay, yeah, we shared the climate trace on, we can share it again. But yeah, kind of due to the lack of public information, we generally need to rely on non-official sources. And that's why I think it's very important that after an investigation is released, to have access not only to the investigation, but for the database as well of the raw data, where the information came from, or from a non-governmental perspective, to build investigations databases and sources that others can use and build on, as like ICIJ and Aleph do when publishing the leaked documents. So trying to combine and build knowledge with each other, and then at the same time, of course, push for policy changes and more transparency. But then also probably the EATI might also have information about oil contracts and how this topic operates. But yeah, it will depend whether the country is a member of the EATI and how much they disclose on that.
And Purity, worth saying that if you're in Kenya as well, obviously there'll be some public databases if they're larger companies that have to declare on stock exchange, things like that. But the public procurement body have actually started including some beneficial ownership data in their release. For people who aren't aware of this, Open Ownership has been doing a project in Kenya, and they've changed all the legislation to allow some of the information about who's winning public contracts to be published. And they just in the last kind of week or two have started publishing some of that. Unfortunately, it's being published as PDFs that are uploaded to system that are currently kind of, at an angle or upside down, and not great examples of publishing the data. But we hope that we can keep talking to people and see if there's better ways to release that. But there is now on the tenders.go.ke website, they are starting to publish some information. So if it was a public contract in the future, they should publish some of that information, but that might not help going back with some of these give me 1 second and I can find some links and share them in the chat.
In the meantime, Elma, do you want to jump in and share what you have inputted in the chat and share with us that?
Hello. Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Elma. I work for Publish What You Fund. So we look at try and measure the transparency of international aid spending. And we have a small project where we are looking at the extent of local ownership in a select number of countries for recipients of US aid. So we found I found the open ownership, open corporates. I found the open corporates website and I was using that. But then I realized what we really needed to know as well was, we realized we needed to know beneficial ownership as well, because obviously that's just the company. But unfortunately I wasn't able to, so I used the beneficial ownership website that you directed me to, and I'm really sorry I had to kind of jump in and out of this call today because I had a couple of other calls, but I have been listening in the background. So I'll have a look at the links when this recording is shared. But so far, I think for the countries that we're looking at, haven't found any beneficial ownership records for those specific companies that we're looking at. So they're just within US, they're recipients of US aid funding basically in 10 countries across Africa, Asia and Latin America.
Could you share which those countries are, or
oh
you
yeah,
can't?
Sure. So there is Liberia, Nepal, Haiti, Jordan, Ethiopia, Zambia, Kenya, Guatemala, Bangladesh and Moldova.
Okay.
So maybe from what you said, maybe that link for the Kenya that you mentioned, perhaps I could check that. Yeah, but for the other ones, I haven't been so successful.
Yeah, well, Stephen is now sharing on the chat the Kenya contracting portal, and they will be shortly including BO data just for those that hold public contracts. So it could be also a hint. And then Liberia will be launching their BO data next year during the first semester. We're helping out with that, but probably you need to launch your investigation before that. So yeah, they don't have currently data available. And then Zambia does have a beneficial ownership register, which is unfortunately under a paywall. So it's not kind of a nicely kind of a bulk, like a register where you can look and download bulk data, but you can request a company's BO disclosure per year. And I think it costs around $5 per PDF. But let me just look out for the website and paste it on the chat, and you can at least look at whether the company has submitted the information or not. And then if you can't find something, or if you're missing information, you can reach out to us, because we've been working a lot with the Zambian government and with PACRA, which is the Patents and Companies Registration Agency. And then maybe we can connect you with them and ask direct questions if you're looking from someone in Zambia. From the other countries that you mentioned, I can't recall of having available data.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, I think I found the website for Zambia because I found there's an index, I think that Open Corporates or Open, sorry, I get all the names mixed up, has, and I found that very useful to try and track which of those countries might have a portal. And the Zambian one I found, it seemed like I needed to be able to log in or something, so that's obviously why. So that's useful to know.
Yeah, maybe you need to create kind of a user, but it's free to create that, and you can definitely access the information. Let me just look out for the exact website to make it in case it's something different.
Okay.
What
Great,
you found. Okay. Yeah, Gabriel, please go ahead.
To answer on that, the last query from Elmer as well, on our open ownership map, if there, you might have missed this section, but if there are registers available, even if you have to pay for them, we try to provide the link so you can click through on our map and then find if there are links to go to. And it's worth saying that, yeah, it can get confusing. It's open something, open this, open that. Open ownership actually started out as a project within Open Corporates. So we use Open Corporates data. If you know a company in Open Corporates and you want to try and find them in our data, you can search using the Open Corporates ID. So wherever we can, we match it up to Open Corporates. At the moment, that's mainly the case for kind of UK, Denmark, and Slovakia, but that's a process that we'll do for any country's data that we can get hold of. Yeah, apologies, sorry to just jump in on that. Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the workshop. Since we started a couple of weeks ago, and we are reached the point at this point in Liberia, we commenced the process of establishing BO registry in Liberia. Currently, we have Favor, who works with OO, and also Ton is in Liberia right now. Yesterday, we were at a training ceremony session right in a hotel, and we were looking at the training technical capacity building for the Liberia Business Registry that will be hosting our registry, BO registry. So what was coming out clearly there was a request that we made that we had just completed the law and also the regulation, and the BO form has been validated. So they're doing some work on it so that we can launch it hopefully first quarter of next year. The next thing is Liberia Business Registry will be collecting the data, starting from extractive sector and going to non-extractive sector. So what our request yesterday, stakeholder request yesterday to Tom and Favor was, okay, the data will be okay, we will be collecting it, but it will not make any sense when it's sitting down there and law enforcement is not doing anything with it. And also civil society and investigative journalists like we saw here, they don't know how to use it. So we were requesting that, okay, if we go live, then we will have to seek requests through Tom to have your team, like acquire your name and Luke, to come in Liberia to do some training for us, and they took it with the advisement that indeed we look up to it. But this is a great effort. And as we move forward, like in Liberia, we have the area of procurement, the area of corruption, the area of extractive manipulation, and all that is here. I mean, you hear even the current one we election commission that had to just go and have some kind of a procurement contract to a company in China and all that. These are things that have kickback and all that. But if the investigators and law enforcement, also the public, the civil society and journalists, we have the way of using the data, we will be able to reach somewhere and make impact. So I think it's a good thing, and we will look forward to have more training, etc. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriel, for the intel and news from Liberia. Okay, so if there are no further questions, reflections, comments, we can finish today. We have no further content on the slides. We just want to thank you all very much for keeping with us until the end. We really hope that these series of workshops were useful and interesting to prompt ideas and to share and learn a bit more about the tools that we have developed, and both understanding the importance of structured and global linkable data, as well as using it and creating your own structured bio data. We know that there's a lot of challenge ahead and lots of lack of data available as well, as we were saying, but we are in the path or working there. Hopefully we'll have more registers in the next years, and more information available. So before we close, I just want to share with you a very, very short evaluation survey that we prepared. It really won't take you more than 2 to 3 minutes. And for us, it will be really important to gather your feedback on what worked and what didn't, and what further either workshops or comments or feedback, general feedback of these engagements you might have with us. And we really hope to keep in touch, both supporting any of the investigations you may have, or if you want to use any of the tools and have further questions that the recordings can't solve, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We are here to help and support in the use and analysis of data. So please be here. Steve, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to echo what Aga said, yeah, thank you to everyone who's joined this workshop and the previous ones. And if you do have any questions, if we can help in any way, you go to the Open Ownership website and you can find a huge amount of information about all of these areas, but also details of how to contact us, and how, for example, if you want to follow the Open Extractives program, as that's doing lots of work in all the countries where everyone from here is represented from. Yeah, there's a whole page with all of the details there, and you can sign up for our newsletter so you can kind of keep in touch. But yeah, we're just very keen to hear what people are trying to do and how we can help. And thank you very much for taking the time out to join us. And yeah, we hope it was useful and that you'll find things that will help with your work in future. And yeah, okay. So please fill in the survey, and thank you very much again just for joining us today.
Bye-bye.